In 1944, the US dollar was firmly established as the global reserve currency following the Bretton Woods Agreement. This decision marked the beginning of the dollar's dominance in the global economy, a reign that has lasted for nearly 8 decades. Fast forward to today, and the global economic landscape is shifting. BRICS, the alliance of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, is challenging the dollar's supremacy, and Washington is growing increasingly nervous. In response, President Trump has issued a bold threat: a 100% tariff on goods from BRICS nations that abandon the US dollar. But rather than backing down, BRICS is forging ahead with its plan to create a new financial order, one that could reshape the global economy in ways we've never seen before. This battle isn't just about trade. It's a fight for financial sovereignty, a contest to break free from the economic chains that have long been imposed by the United States. If BRICS succeeds, it could fundamentally change the way the global financial system operates. So, the question remains: can BRICS succeed in its challenge to the US dollar, or will Trump's threats force the group back in line? Let's break down this complex and high-stakes situation. At the heart of this financial confrontation is BRICS's growing movement to settle trade in local currencies rather than the US dollar. This shift is not only about reducing reliance on the dollar, it's about reclaiming control over their economies and breaking free from a system that has for too long been under the influence of Washington. The 2025 statement issued under Brazil's leadership reinforces this commitment, underscoring the alliance's stance on financial independence. BRICS nations are calling for comprehensive economic reforms to reduce their dependency on Western financial institutions, particularly those that are dominated by the US. A key part of this strategy is strengthening BRICS's own financial institutions, most notably the New Development Bank, NDB, also known as the BRICS Bank. The NDB has already been instrumental in funding development projects in local currencies, taking an essential step toward bypassing the US dollar and diminishing its role in global trade. Brazil, under the leadership of President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, is playing a pivotal role in this push. Lula has long been critical of the dollar-dominated global financial system, arguing that it disproportionately benefits developed nations while leaving developing countries vulnerable to economic manipulation. His vision for BRICS is one where developing nations have more control over their financial policies, allowing them to make independent decisions without being beholden to the whims of Washington's economic policies. China, Russia, and India have already begun settling trade agreements in yuan, rubles, and rupees, respectively. These moves are part of a broader trend toward de-dollarization, a process that is not just a tactical decision, but a strategic attempt to minimize exposure to US economic power. One of the most significant moves in this direction was the agreement between India and the UAE to conduct oil transactions in rupees instead of dollars, a historic deal that sets a precedent for future trade agreements. The momentum behind this shift is undeniable. Moving away from the dollar is not just about trading more efficiently. It's about protecting themselves from the US's weaponization of financial power. For years, the US has used its control over the global financial system to impose sanctions on countries that defy its geopolitical interests. Russia, for instance, has faced heavy sanctions following its conflict with Ukraine, while China has been the target of various trade disputes with the US. By reducing their dependence on the dollar, BRICS nations aim to shield themselves from the financial pressures that the US is so adept at using to bend other nations to its will. This move to de-dollarize trade agreements is a direct challenge to US economic power, and Trump has made it clear that he sees it as a threat to America's global financial supremacy. His 100% tariff threat is an aggressive attempt to maintain control over global trade and force BRICS nations back into the dollar-centric system. Trump has always been a staunch defender of the dollar, famously declaring that losing the US dollar's dominance in global trade would be akin to losing a war. This is no exaggeration. The global demand for the US dollar has allowed the US to print money without causing hyperinflation or economic collapse. If BRICS succeeds in reducing its reliance on the dollar, it could cause a significant decline in the dollar's demand, leading to instability in the US economy. For the US, the importance of the dollar goes beyond global trade. It plays a crucial role in funding the government's massive deficits. The US relies on the world's demand for its currency to purchase US Treasury bonds, which helps keep interest rates low and maintains a stable economy. If countries start abandoning the dollar, the value of the US dollar could weaken, making it more expensive for the US government to borrow money. In short, the US is deeply invested in maintaining the dollar's global dominance, and any threat to that system is seen as a direct attack on its financial stability. Trump's solution is clear: tariffs. He believes that imposing a 100% tariff on goods from BRICS countries would make their exports significantly more expensive in the US, forcing them to reconsider their plans to move away from the dollar. But BRICS leaders seem undeterred. They are calling Trump's bluff, showing no signs of backing down from their push for de-dollarization. The big question is whether BRICS will continue to push forward with its plans for de-dollarization, or whether Trump's threats will force them into submission. The US remains an important trading partner for BRICS countries, but they also recognize that the global economy is no longer dominated by Washington alone. China, in particular, has emerged as a powerful alternative to the US, offering trade opportunities that don't require the use of the dollar. If BRICS remains committed to its plan, the global financial order could undergo a dramatic shift. Countries that have long been dependent on the US dollar may begin to explore alternative financial systems, gradually reducing Washington's influence over global trade and finance. This process wouldn't happen overnight, but the long-term implications could be profound. As more countries adopt local currencies for trade, the dollar's dominance would start to fade, and the US would lose much of its economic leverage. But there are risks. If Trump follows through with his tariff threats, a trade war could break out, disrupting economic ties between BRICS nations and the US. While countries like Brazil and India maintain strong economic relations with the US, they are also acutely aware of the dangers of over-reliance on Washington's financial system. A trade war would likely hurt both sides, but it could also push BRICS nations to strengthen economic partnerships with each other and with other emerging markets. This could lead to the development of alternative financial systems that bypass the US, isolating Washington in the process. Another possibility is that BRICS may slow its de-dollarization efforts to avoid a full-scale confrontation with the US. Instead of immediately rejecting the dollar, BRICS could gradually shift trade agreements, making the transition to local currencies in stages. This would allow BRICS to achieve financial independence over time while minimizing the risk of provoking an aggressive response from Washington. However, given BRICS's strong commitment to its 2025 statement, it seems unlikely that the alliance will back down entirely. The momentum is behind them, and the desire for financial sovereignty is too strong to abandon. The larger question is whether Trump's tariff threats are even justified. The world today is not the same as it was in the post-World War II era, when the US held undisputed control over global finance. Today, economies are more interconnected than ever, and financial power is shifting away from the West and toward emerging markets. Trump's threats assume that the US has the authority to dictate how other nations conduct trade. But in an era that champions free markets and national sovereignty, his position is increasingly out of step with the changing global landscape. BRICS nations are not breaking international law. They are simply choosing to conduct trade using their own currencies. If the US truly believes in a free and open global economy, why should it have the right to dictate which currency other sovereign nations use? The US is not the only nation that should have a say in the global economy. Trump's logic also fails to account for the fact that BRICS's push for de-dollarization is not an attack on the US, but an economic strategy aimed at securing financial stability and reducing vulnerability to US sanctions. For years, the global economy has been vulnerable to US monetary policies. When the Federal Reserve raises interest rates, countries around the world, especially developing nations, feel the shock waves. By reducing their reliance on the dollar, BRICS is simply mitigating this risk. It's a move that any responsible economic alliance would consider. Furthermore, if the US can print trillions of dollars at will to fund its economy, while expecting the rest of the world to continue using a currency whose value is declining, isn't that economic coercion? Trump's threats reveal a double standard. America wants the freedom to control its financial system, but denies that same freedom to others. If the US can prioritize its economic interests, why shouldn't BRICS do the same? Trump's tariffs also contradict the basic principles of capitalism. A free market is supposed to operate on competition, not coercion. If the US dollar is truly the best global currency, it should not need government-backed threats to maintain its dominance. If BRICS countries find better trade options using their own currencies, they should be free to explore them. After all, isn't that how a competitive global economy is supposed to work? The days of a unipolar financial world are quickly fading. The rise of China, the economic expansion of BRICS, and the diversification of trade markets all signal a shift toward a more multipolar world, where no single nation has control over the global financial system. Trump's threats ignore this reality, treating the global economy as if it still revolves around US supremacy. But the times are changing, and BRICS is showing that financial independence is not an act of defiance. It is simply a necessary evolution in a world no longer controlled by a single superpower. So, should Trump impose harsh tariffs simply because BRICS is making independent financial choices? The short answer is no. Sovereign nations should not be bullied into economic submission for exercising their right to control their trade. The world is changing, and the U.S. must adapt to this new reality. The sooner Washington recognizes this shift, the better it can adjust to the evolving global financial landscape, before it finds itself fighting a losing battle against the future. In the end, BRICS has made its message clear. It's moving forward with de-dollarization, no matter the opposition. Trump has responded with his strongest warning yet, threatening severe tariffs if BRICS refuses to comply. This economic standoff is shaping up to be one of the most significant financial battles in modern history. If BRICS succeeds, it will mark the dawn of a new era in global trade, one where the US dollar is no longer the default currency. If Trump's threats succeed, BRICS nations may be forced to reconsider their strategy, finding new ways to gain financial independence. This battle will have profound consequences, not only for BRICS and the US, but for the entire global financial system. As the world watches, the question remains, will BRICS break free from US control, or will Trump's warnings force them back into line? The next chapter in this global financial power struggle is about to unfold. The impact will be felt across economies worldwide. What do you think? Should Trump reconsider his approach? Should the US try to control everyone? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more videos on politics, the economy, and shifting global power dynamics. Stay tuned, and we'll see you in the next video.